Let's get started. Sold out again. That's amazing. So I would first of all like to welcome all of you here and say a little bit something about how we're going to do this tonight. It's not my cell phone, luckily. Because there's a lot of people here in the audience that I greatly appreciate for who they are and what they've done, and I would actually love to share this evening with you, because I'm sure that some of you also have burning questions for Silvia, and that's why we thought we don't want to squeeze them in the last 15 minutes, but we make them part of the discussion. Yeah, despite this very head-on setting, I want your question and your perspectives on the topic we're going to be discussing to be part of our conversations tonight. So, and also shape where this all is going. Silvia and I will talk for about 1 hour, and then I would actually like to open this discussion for questions from the audience. All right, Silvia, let's try to introduce ourselves, maybe with some facts that Google does not know about ourselves. It will be much easier for me, I know, because Google does not know that much about me, but maybe you will also be able to think about something. I will go first, and then I will ask you to do the same. So my name is Stefania Koller. I'm a social animal. That's what a friend once said about me. I think I'm a caring friend, a pretty good neighbor, a full-time committed urban citizen, a great listener and a fabulous organizer. And I love a good dinner in great company, but cooking, I really don't like that. I also love cats, and the fact that they are a biodiversity killer pains me deeply. So that's what I think would be something I would like all of you to know about myself. So Silvia, who are you?
Oh, am I? Okay, so first of all, I want to thank, you, Stefania. I want to thank Hans Wittmer and all the people who have collaborated to bring me here. And I want to thank you all for coming tonight to have this discussion. I always look forward to this situation, because for me, they're really a learning experience. A lot of the things I say are also things that I learn and think about, from after discussing with other people. And who am I? Well, I'm 81 years old. I was born in Italy, and I went to the United States with the idea of staying 1 year, and I stayed more than 50. I live in New York, and I've been a teacher and a feminist, and this is basically my identity. I figure that all the political identities is the one that I'm more happy to identify with, although I've been involved in other movements as well. And now I'm on a grand tour from Zurich.
You are.
Yes.
2 times Zurich and then
going
another.
to Geneva, and I'm always very happy to come back. This is now my first time in Zurich. I've come in Zurich many times, and Geneva as well. And I have a lot of friends, comrades, sisters in Switzerland. And so this has always been a great place for me to come. Thank you very much.
We're going to focus, of course, or talk a little bit about Zurich or the setting that we have here. But first of all, I want to look quickly back on yesterday. We met at the Theaterspektakel. We were both there, you on the stage, me in the audience, with many others who are also here today. Managed to get another seat. Congratulations. And you talked about the body as a terrain of resistance, a very powerful talk. And I think today's topic, feminism and the commons, seems like the perfect chance to pick up where we left off the conversation yesterday. And maybe we can expand on some of the thoughts that were addressed yesterday, but we could not go into deep. And most of all, I would also love to kind of take a look into a post-capitalist feminist future that we are all longing to live in. Now, I assume that you're all eagerly awaiting to paint, Silvia, this picture for us. But first, I have a little question for all of you. who of you knows what Neustart Schweiz is? And don't worry, this will not be the interactive part. I just want to know if I can lose a few words on this or if we can skip this part. So let's do it like this. Who does not know what Neustart Schweiz does? Oh, perfect. Amazing. Amazing. So I will lose a few words on Neustart Schweiz and then we enter into the discussion. Here you are, having to listen to me. Perfect. So give me just a few minutes to get us all on the same ground, at the common ground, and let me introduce you to Neustart Schweiz, who is actually the host of tonight's event. It's an association that advocates for the sustainable reorganization of society by creating inclusive, multifunctional neighborhoods and cities. Beyond that, we understand the neighborhood as the smallest module of a bigger net of global commons, and that's probably the most complicated way of talking about what we do, so I'm going to try to break it down to you in very simple terms. We love spinning ideas, we love writing books, we love talking to people, and we love spreading knowledge. And in doing so, we actually want to encourage people to start their own projects and initiatives in order to move forward the transformation that we also desperately long for. Our focus lies in the neighborhood model. And I want to come to that in a second. The questions you see behind me are usually some questions that we ask people if we try to engage in a conversation. And normally people answer yes to all of them. It's like, do you care where your food is from? Probably yes. Do you want community and privacy at the same time? Probably also something a lot of people want. Do you want to have all that matters close to your home? Probably. And do you want to live an enjoyable life and protect natural resources? Probably yes. And then if you answer yes to all of these questions, we're usually following up with the neighborhood models and we tell them we have a solution for you, or we have a proposal. I don't want to call it a solution, but a proposal. Because we think the neighborhood is the smallest meaningful entity of our society. And because we also believe that this is where a sustainable transformation should be starting. So in order to make it easily understandable, we broke it down to these 7 ingredients, and I'm going to stand up to read them to you in a second, because it's these 7 points that I want to talk to you about afterwards, Silvia. We think it should have a certain size, a neighborhood, around 500 people. We should think it should offer diverse housing options, so you have a mixed community of people. We think the community should be demographically responding to the surrounding. We think it should be set in a compact urban environment that maybe have something to do with sustainability and also, sharing resources. We think it should be tied to a regional land base that has something to do with eating. We think there should be a microcenter and other necessities on the ground floor of the neighborhood. So no living in the neighborhood, because in the ground floor of the neighborhood, that's where the city is happening. And we think household work and care work should be organized internally. So that's basically the topics that we always talk about when we talk about neighborhood. We do dare to go a little bit beyond, and we have these other global modules that we think about, but bottom line, we always come back to the neighborhood, because again, I think that's where transformation is starting to happen. I think also that's where the concept of commoning has its roots. If you want, in case you want to deepen your knowledge about that, you can also get the books after our talk. But that's it for Neustart Schweiz now, from me talking. And now I want to talk to you about these topics that we think are essential to the neighborhood. So let's talk about feminism and commoning in a neighborhood. I would like to share 2 thoughts with you. I must admit, when I first initially learned about the neighborhood model, I did not think about feminism at first. But then when I came to think about it and I see the whole household work and care work that are so essential to the idea of organizing a neighborhood, I see that it's actually deeply rooted within. And the second thought is, I feel like I do have an understanding of what commons are, because we always talk about them when we talk about neighborhood and how to organize in an alternative future. But personally, I then often struggle when it comes to giving examples to people of what they are. So let's maybe pick up on these thoughts with regard to the neighborhood and everyday life. And all these 7 ingredients, where do you see the aspects of commoning and feminism most strongly in a neighborhood?
Well, I mean, very quickly, I mean, commoning has to do with the reorganization of the life, of reproductive life, the everyday, activities, whether it is from cooking to caring to child raising to making decisions about health and so forth. All of this, in a capitalist society, have been organized in a totally individualized way that has actually isolated, separated women from each other. I mean, the nuclear family, which in fact has turned for many women into a kind of prison, because the nuclear family supports you, but at the same time also, fixes you in a whole set of activity that particularly women historically have had to perform alone. And in isolation to other people. The whole idea of the privacy, the home as your little kingdom and you're private, you're separate from others. So this whole way of organizing reproduction, if Italian feminist Leopoldo Fortunati has written that, capitalism has historically brought together socialized, production, brought concentrated workers. It's not true any longer, by the way, but concentrated worker in production. But when it comes to reproduction, it has decentered. And so I think that much of what we mean by commoning in terms of, transformation, really having a transformative power, it's the reorganization of everyday life, reproductive work, the production of life, in a way that is collective, that is cooperative, that unites what capitalism has divided. And I think this is not a utopia. Much of what I'm talking about is something that I've seen, already beginning to happen in many different neighborhoods, not necessarily perhaps in New York or, I don't know, Zurich, but certainly in many parts of Latin America. This is now taking place and is done usually, in communities of people who have had no alternative but to actually reorganize their life from bottom up. People, and mostly women, the initiative of women. People, for example, have been expelled from the countryside, from different extractivist World Bank projects, pushed out of the countryside, forced to go to the city, forced to, in a sense, invent and construct a new life, building houses, shacks at first, and then maybe later a house, and then streets, all through collective work, A lot of the transformation that is taking place now in neighborhood is really done by people who in a way had no alternative, but had some experience, particularly coming from indigenous communities, of collective work. And so, women have been in the forefront. And if you go, for example, in Buenos Aires, in what are called the Villa Miserias, these are communities, some pretty big now, with several thousand people. These are communities who have really been created by people who are migrants from the countryside or migrants from other countries, who have collectively formed new communities. And there, these are very, very poor neighborhoods. They are neighborhoods where the state is only present in a military way, usually with some soldiers here and there with a rifle, this, little shack of houses, but there is no social service, nothing, and so, in fact, a lot of the work, of keeping the reproduction, going, is being done by women, and putting together forms of first aid, sharing and recuperating traditional forms of medicine, medical knowledge, organizing activities for children, organizing to bring the children to school because there's no cross light, so they are not run over by a truck, checking on the poorest people, those who might not have any food, so that they actually may have some food, they might not die of hunger, which could actually be likely, and organizing also meeting assemblies to make decisions about all of this is now taking place, right? So, for example, the assembly as a place for decision making, and of course, it has been in moments of struggle. I mean, the famous struggle in 2000 of the piqueteros. I mean, people might be familiar here with the struggle, and actually, some of the first form of cooperative commoning reproduction, have taken place in Latin America, not only in response to expulsion from the countryside and the need to build a new life, but also in response, for example, in Chile, to coup, after the famous, coup in 1973, when everybody was terrorized, people were being disappeared, and community extremely impoverished. And then the first response, one of the first response after this reign of terror, it was women who began to come together, go out in the street, brings the big olla, the big pots into the street and begin to cook collectively, both to stretch the resources and also to overcome the isolation. So that moment, that has been written about and reflected upon. I was in Santiago some years ago, and I talked to one of the women who was one of the organizers. And it was so important because it was actually the food, but it also was the coming together, and it was the being able to circulate information. So I'm saying this is happening. And this is happening also in response to the fact that the reorganization of economic life in so many parts of the world is actually destroying older forms, and commoning is emerging, is one way that people can survive, both by stretching the resources, but also creating new community, creating new relations.
I already have a bunch of follow-up questions.
Sure.
But let's you just mentioned now the very last sentence before we go back to the examples of Latin America, and maybe also the question of how we can get this moment of power, empowering here in Switzerland, completely different setting. But let's go first for 1 second back to the term use of commoning as like a verb that you used in the very now in your last sentence and also before. Maybe can we talk quickly a little bit about this? That it's not, I mean, commons is a thing. One would think it's a thing, but commoning is an attitude. And I think
it's an activity, it's a relation.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's very, very important. In fact, I was saying yesterday, at the festival that often in our imagination we think of the commons, right, as material realities, right? We think of an urban garden, we think of a field that is being cultivated collectively, as it was often in the Middle Ages. For example, in England, the term commons really comes from England, right? And the commons were grazing ground for animals, were pastures, but even in medieval England, commons were never just material things or goods. They were a set of rules, a set of norms. You know, commons were connected with a whole set of users' rights, right? So you have the landlord who gave a village or groups of farmers, of peasants, right? Not only pieces of land to use, to cultivate for their reproduction, but also a whole set of rules. You have rights. You have the right to go to the wood and take so much for fuel. You have the right to go to the pond and fish, right? So there was, and there were regulations. So commons has always been more than just a material, you know, and the idea of commoning. Peter Limbaugh, who is a radical, many of you may know him, historian in the United States, you know, has been using and popularized this term to say that to move away from the idea of commons as just, you know, something material, and stressing the idea that commons is a social relation, is a way of thinking how to organize society, is a way of thinking of how we relate to each other in society, you know, and how we organize. It's a principle of social organization. Yeah, in the same way as capitalism is a principle of social organization. So common is an alternative, is the opposite exactly of capitalism, right? So in that sense, commoning has become very popular, you know, to indicate that there's a whole activity. There is not just the static reality, material realities. Yeah.
When we talked about that, or not we, you,
and many others, and many others. What I say is definitely not unique.
But you also talked about the topic of effective ties.
Yeah.
You already touched upon it now a little bit, but maybe I would like to go a bit deeper into that. You said we need these ties, and we need to reconnect to each other to break free of isolation and individualization that we are stuck in.
Absolutely.
And in order to get from an anti-capitalistic struggle to a feminist transformation, and also to make this whole the struggle sustainable somehow. So I thought that was very, very interesting.
And very important today, never more important, you know, because I think there is an immense, gigantic effort. I know we live it in the United States, and every minute there's a gigantic effort to inculcate in us the idea that other people are a danger. And in fact, that much of our activity has to be organized around protecting ourselves from others. And the idea that other people are actually a source of richness for us. The relation with other people, social relations are a great wealth, are what make life worth living in many ways. Relation with nature, relation with people. And the opposite. So there is this tremendous effort, right? And I mean, the TV, et cetera, movies. So I think it's very, very important, you know, this question of, you know, commoning to see the effective, the transformation, the going beyond this individualism, going beyond this idea of ourself and our life in these little, you know, enclosures, right? That we are separate from others. And when I wrote Beyond the Periphery of the Skin, I wanted to really stress this continuity between us and the world, that the self is not a self-enclosed, right? We are not monads without windows and without doors, but actually we are the self is always an extended reality that is continuously affected and modified by nature, by other people. How do you fall in love? Unless you were not affected by other people, right? So, in fact, our bodies are always on a continuous with the bodies of others.
Of course.
We are affected by the weather, by the sun. We get depressed if we don't see the sky for many years, et cetera, et cetera. So this idea of, you know, but capitalism is always this, you know, fragmenting us and enclosing us, you know, and again, the way the family is conceived. So I think the idea of the commons is the idea of going beyond that. And again, it's not just a patch of land that we share, right? But it's something much more than that. It's a question of sharing, putting our life in common, putting our life to understand, you know, notions of reciprocity, interdependence, etc., that our life are not concluded or completed in themselves, but they are constantly interdependent with the life of others. So it's to actually concretize that interdependence, make what is a potential to make it real. And that requires a whole organization.
So, from what I hear from you, it's also for you a fact that feminism and commoning are they are how do you say a pair? They go hand in hand. They should go hand in hand.
Go.
So I'm interested in this intersection of feminism and commoning. What happens if this link is lost?
Well, what happens is, yes, of course, what happened is link is lost. Then you have the feminism of the Hillary Clinton.
We're already back at Hillary Clinton. I wanted to bring it up later, but here we go.
No, but I'm saying that of course there's been, nowadays we speak of feminisms because it's very clear there is not one feminism, right? But certainly there is a very strong trend in feminism today to actually see the feminist movement, right? You know, as a movement that is inspired and engaged, in creating new forms of community, right? Precisely in breaking down this isolation, you know, of people from each other and from nature, right? And so there are different types also of theories of the commons.
Yeah,
very
I would
different.
love to talk about
There's
that.
a whole world, for example, of activists who are very interested in digital commons, the internet and so on. And then there's been another world, the feminist. There's been a feminist theory of the commons. And here, you know, I learned a lot from women like Maria Mies, who just recently died, that I imagine many of you know about. She has written very, very much about the commons. Right, and because she was born in the Eifel, a region in Germany, in a small peasant community that was working, doing agriculture for subsistence, and she grew up in a common, right, and then lived in India, and where again experienced, the existence of extensive form of communal life, and wrote about the commons. I really encourage people to read her work. And she always even talked about negative commons. For instance, she thought trash is our common, is a negative common. For instance, trash, she pointed out, is something that will not exist in a non-exploitative society, because you make sure you use everything and reuse, etc. And she pointed out that the way capitalism has organized our everyday life, and the way they've organized agriculture, the way they've organized the way we consume, right, the way we reproduce ourselves, right, it's a way that makes us irresponsible, right? Because we don't see where the food that we produce comes from. Much of the food that we eat, I can speak for the United States, much of the food we eat comes from faraway places. And we don't know how much blood, for example, has gone into the production of that food, in what kind of fields it has been, maybe fields that have been expropriated by agribusiness. We don't know how the food is being produced, what's in it. And we don't know what to do with that trash. So there is an irresponsibility. The fact that the production of what we need and what we use and the consumption, our consumption, are so distant from each other. that we don't know the processes that are involved in what we do, is actually making us, regardless of our intention, irresponsible towards. So we don't ask, where is the trash when we throw it out? Where is it going to go? Like when we decide to discard the box or something else or an old clothes, we usually don't ask, in what field this thing is going to go? This is the principle of the common, is to begin to ask, where is this that I'm using going to go? In which field this thing that is rotten, maybe poisonous, maybe this and this, in which field is it going to go? In which waters is going to make poisonous? Obviously, we don't always have the means to do that, because that's part of the problem. Capitalism deprives you of the means of really caring for everything. But this is where the struggle begins.
And we should start
This
asking.
is where the struggle begins. We should start asking and organizing around that. Where's the trash going? Is it going to an incinerator, which then goes into somebody's lungs, which then goes into a cancer? Or are we going to do something about? This is the principle of the common. Not just a piece of land that we cultivate together, but it's a whole way of making ourselves responsible for the life of other people as well, and expecting, of course, other people to be responsible for our lives. This is really the fundamental principle, not to live as sort of little islands, only concerned for my family, my privacy, myself, and me this, etc., but to realize that, in fact, the fundamental safety of our life comes in our relationship with other people, comes not only in our grabbing as much as possible, but comes in having good relationship. That this is the actually most important form of safety that we can aspire to. Yeah.
I would like to go for a second back to that question of the different types of feminism and commons, because in Re-enchanting the World, you talk about the fact that we have to be aware whether the commons we create actually transform social relations, or whether they are corrupted by capitalism. You mention commons co-opted by the state, closed commons, and commons producing for the market. And I think these are very interesting thoughts also to share here in Switzerland, because we are a deeply capitalist society, so it's not so easy to get rid of all these shackles, let's call them that. And so what is your opinion, or what are your thoughts on this? What happens when the commons are corrupted? Or also feminism, is it still valuable, or is it basically also undermining a long-term social transformation? You know what I mean? Do they have a value, these closed commons?
No, but I don't think that they're closed feminist commons. I don't know, but I don't know feminist commons that are built on the principle of exclusion. So when we talk,
no, I mean the term separately. Let's talk about the commons.
So there are many, so, again, it's like when I talk about feminism, I always assume a certain kind of feminism. And when I talk about the commons, it's too. So it's very important to say that not every collectivity that comes together and shares resources is a common, all right? Or not every, let's call common. It's a valid, because some are built on the principle exclusion. Those, for example, are built on a religious principle, right? So all this, or on the basis of income, or on the basis of a particular creed, and so on, right? So we have now, for instance, in the United States, the idea of the commons has been really appropriated by real estate. And now you have clusters of really well-to-do housing that are defined the commons. And they share some greens, they share some things, and they're organized in a way that appears communally. Communally for the people inside. Communally for the people inside, but not open to people from outside. So there's a lot of discussion about, well, who's the commoner? Who's the commoner? And, one of the answers that we always is that belonging to a common has nothing to do with accepting, an exclusionary principle. It has to do with accepting the principle of reciprocal responsibility towards other people and towards the wealth that is used. So if you're willing to do the work, not only of caring for other people, as well as being cared for, but also the work, for example, if you have to gather land or other goods, to make sure that they are reproduced, they are not just destroyed, consumed in a way that is not usable again. The indigenous people used to say that you have to use the land in a way that it makes it available for the next 7 generations. That's a good principle, right? That
Yes.
you leave what you use in a way that can be used by others. So there's a principle of caring. In some indigenous communities, for instance, you cannot really be part of the commons or make decision unless you do some of the work. You cannot talk in the assembly where collective decision making is done unless you've done the work. No
But
work,
it's your
no
choice.
talk.
But it's your choice if you do the work.
Yeah.
And you can.
Yeah. If you do the work, then you can talk.
So
Then you can make decision. Then you participate to the decision making. But if you don't, shouldn't decide about the community if you don't contribute to the community. If you only take and you don't contribute. So the idea of reciprocity, of interdependence, of taking and giving back to people and giving back to the land, giving back to the resources that you use. That's the idea.
So we made quite a big split now between examples you brought from Latin America, and on the other hand, the closed-gated communities.
Closed-gated community, yes.
In the US.
Yes, yeah.
But I would like to maybe try to talk about the one example that we have in Switzerland quite often, which are the housing cooperatives, which some of them understand themselves as in the tradition of commoning, some of them also not, because it's not every housing cooperative is the same. They are all completely different. But what do you think about this this model of maybe the ones you also know from your experience with Neustart Schweiz, which are like Kraftwerk or the ones that call themselves the young wild, which are also 30 years old now in meantime. But what do you think about them? Because do they have aspects of also closed commoning?
Well, I mean, I live in a building in New York who is a cooperative building.
Yes.
Because in the 1920s and 30s, in New York, it's really typical of New York. There are not many other places in the United States where they have this. Because I think of social movement and so on. So there was a lot of cooperative things. And so that I don't own my apartment, but we share certain things. We share a certain amount, and all the decisions have to be made collectively. But nevertheless, you have to pay rent, you have to pay this, you have to pay that. It's fully inserted in a whole, right? And so these initiatives are good because they begin to, transforming this world that is so completely, totally permeated by capitalist relation. It's going to be a major, major process of transformation. And the struggle that we make and all the attempts and so on are also experiments in figuring out how do we live together. We all carry so much capitalism in ourselves. Part of the reason to struggle is to free ourselves in all the capitalism we have interiorized. And so these initiatives, I think, important, but no.
Not all the way there yet.
No.
Okay,
no.
but you think so? Yeah. But the problem, I think, is that we are in these societies that are so deeply capitalist that it's almost not possible to build something that does not become an island, as long as it's so few, Well,
but that's where the struggle is. I think that's where the challenge is, right? So that the commons don't become this. Massimo De Angeli put it. The commons don't become the safety valve for the capitalism in crisis.
They should.
That's a very important thing. The commons don't become the way in which we can actually adjust ourselves for a world that is completely destructive. and therefore we can carve ourselves little spaces. I think that this is the question, right? I think that, yeah.
We're almost.
Oh my God.
We have a little bit more time before we open the questions to you. Maybe it goes into the same direction, and it's also a very big topic. But let me, because it's something that I'm struggling with sometimes. It's a question like, can you do right in a wrong system? But before you answer, let me because the topic came also up yesterday when someone asked the question about the cell phones. I don't know if the person is here today, but so I think it's just a very interesting questions, and but I want to make a little bit a bigger arch because. As we said before, like there's so many the small initiatives like these cooperatives and so on that I myself understand in a larger network of commoning, and I find this thought extremely empowering. You know, that all of a sudden you realize if I'm living in a housing cooperative or I'm doing a certain work in a certain community, or then the moment you start understanding, it's not just this little thing I'm doing, but it's actually can be understood in a wider network of commoning. And this is now not a question, but a statement. And I would just like to thank Neustart Schweiz and you and many others sitting here today that gave me the opportunity to see and understand these connections through your reflection. But of course, seeing and understanding also means realizing how contradictory and inconsistent my own acting many times is. So maybe some of you can relate. I don't know. So the question for you, like, how do I and how do we all keep from becoming the little Hillary Clintons, or how do we, again, to put it in other words, can we do right in a wrong system?
No, I'm sure that we do a lot of wrong things in the sense, but I think that that's a question of coming together and being able to discuss, for example, food, right? Okay, so now we have some option, and I know that it's going to be option. I don't know about Zurich. I was in Geneva.
Slowly, we have options.
I know in Geneva, on the outskirts of Geneva, and there is a huge field where people in movements and so on can go. That is cultivated collectively, and people can go and pick up food themselves, and you don't have to go to the supermarket and buy food that comes from Bangladesh, or Latin America. And there are farmers markets. We have, for example, now in the United States, community-supported agriculture. Community-supported agriculture is basically people are growing food in the land, and then, you at the beginning of each season, you give some money to them, and then... So there is a struggle. Nothing is perfect, but there is a struggle. And once you are involved in the struggle, there is a knowledge, there is a consciousness, there is an awareness of where this food is coming from or not coming from. And you begin to understand what is involved. You begin to understand, I think, that people, because of community-supported agriculture in the United States, have a much better understanding of what it means to grow food today that they may have had if they were not engaged with that organization. So the fact that now these efforts are made, they might not be perfect, they might not be, but nevertheless, there is a whole way in which you begin to tackle and do the work. Where is the food that we eat come from, right? And where is the trash that goes to, right? And what kind of struggle we need to make? Not only to recycle, but also to make sure that certain type of production do not take place. Why the labor movement does not become involved? For example, the hundreds of boxes, the hundreds, et cetera. So these are, once you become involved in that process, and you begin to see what the trash is doing to the earth, and you begin to see what is the process of the trash. It goes into the sea. It goes into an incinerator and people's health. It goes into the field of somebody in another country. It poison it, etc., etc. Then I think this is the kind of work you know, and so I think it's more useful not to be hampered, not to be by the limits of what we can do at any particular stage. Maybe tomorrow we can do better. But to begin to actually confront some of the problem and not live in the, you know, happy ignorance that they want us to live in, where, you know, you have children who think that the carrots are grown in plastic. Right?
And also not be
For example, in the schools, to have the children, you know, deal with the land, to show them where an onion is coming from. It's already something that is very educational. So they don't think that that is coming, right? To, you know, I always quote a beautiful chapter in Vandana Shiva, Staying Alive, where she talks about forest. And she talks about a forest, and she shows that the forest in the older days were practically a whole reproductive system. Practically, you could live in a forest and have all your needs met, spiritual and physical, you know. And that kind of understanding recuperated an understanding of the so-called nature, which is not like a picture that you put in your album. You know, nature is becoming such an object, so objectified. So that, I think, is what we can do. That's and then tomorrow another generation will do better.
So not feel limited by the contradictions, but just do it and do it again and again and better. Now you have been engaged with feminism and the commons for many years, and you've seen probably social movements come and go. Maybe some stay, become stronger. You've seen political tendencies shift from one side to the other. How do you feel?
Yeah, well,
optimistic.
Right now?
Yeah.
No, well, okay.
Or
so
despair, optimism, despair.
No, angry.
Okay. Angry. Okay.
No,
okay.
not pessimistic, but angry.
Okay.
Yeah. Pessimism, as somebody said, is a luxury.
Yeah.
Pessimism
we can't
is a
afford
luxury. Yeah, exactly. Pessimistic will be you're not going to do anything. But, well, you know, these children being born, the people, you cannot be pessimistic. But angry, yes. Yeah.
Because like it gives also
I wish
power.
I had more energy. Now I'm an old woman. I wish I had more energy because I think this world is terrible. It's a terrible, cruel, exploitative, and there's a lot of beauty in it, and there's a lot of struggle. And that's what gives me, I keep my eyes on the struggle.
All right. Now, we've already spent our hour together, and so I would actually like to open the discussion to the audience. Fred is here, Fred over there with the microphone. Just 1 second before, we have enough time. We have enough time. What do I want to say before you start asking questions? Maybe if you want, you can give us a little bit a one-liner about the perspective where your question is coming from. And then, just ask away. If you don't want to give us the perspective, then just ask the question straight. And I have one question that was sent to me by Yael, sitting here in front of me, that I would like to start the discussion with. Her background is from arts and education. And she asks, in an interview, you said that capitalism separates us and turns everyone into lone fighters. These mechanisms also shape our education system and the way we learn today. Do you see a link between education and the commons? In other words, how can we use art education to regain the need for collective decision-making and action, and to counteract the mechanisms of individualism? Yeah,
well, first of all, in terms of education, I think, well, for every aspect of life, right, in a sense, you have to think of change, have to change the whole. But more immediately, one aspect of education, I think, is to take away education from the market, number one, right? So in the United States, it's like with healthcare. Take away all of that from the market. In the United States now, there are young people who are ruining themselves, about to be able to get a degree and so on. Yeah, so they make it, imperative for you to have a certain kind of education. And then you have to enslave yourself for the next. They are now old people who are still paying.
Yeah.
Still paying, yeah. So take that. And secondly, the whole organization of work and time, so the people have more time. Education, not just for a few years, the ability people have in time and the energy to be continuing. And, so there's been a lot of talk about education in commons, free universities, creating spaces where knowledge can circulate and be produced outside of market channels. All of that is important. And art, the struggle to collectivize art, to take away this, because we're moving, back to a very bourgeois conception of art for the few, half for the rich, half for the few who have the time and the money, etc., etc. And in the United States, for example, in the past, at the elementary level or secondary, there was always an art class. And now these have been taken away. You have to go to a private school, for example, for children to be able to paint, to do sculpture, dance, music, all of that. Art should be part of everyday life. Art should really be part of every aspect of life. And so that kind of struggle, I think, is fundamental, right? To actually take away, change the conception. And also, de-individualize art. It's clear that there is a strong individual component, but nevertheless, in the United States, we're seeing a move, particularly after the killing of George Floyd, which was a tremendous, had a tremendous emotional impact. I think it was many people were shaken, and there was a powerful movement. And as a part of the movement, there was a lot of collective art. Like the figure, the face of Floyd was painted in a lot of walls, so the people will not forget. And it was done by artists, but also with a lot of people in the community. And that, I think, has been the mural, the experience of the mural, right? Of not just the artist as a specialist, but also working with community and reintroducing art, which is really a need, for everyday life, and so I think that's where the common in aspect it is.
I would love to add to that to everyone who was not there yesterday. I think it reminds me of that moment where we talked about the. I keep saying we. I did not talk.
Yeah,
I just.
It's good to talk in ways. It's good to talk in ways.
When we talked about the happiness and the singing and the art.
Yes.
Maybe you want to add
I was
that
saying
thought
that. Yeah, the question of, but we talked a lot about the fact of the forms of organization, the forms of struggle, right? The question of the commons has to be present at every level, including, in the forms of organization that we have, because there's been a traditionally male-dominated organization, an idea of the struggle, where, you fight with the police, or you go out in the square, thousands of people, but then you go home and nothing has changed, right? And you continue an individual life. And, I've been saying, no, more and more, and I think the feminist movement has given a great contribution to it, that you cannot really make a struggle that changes the world unless you also transform your everyday life, unless you also create a different relation with the people in which you are a struggle, and I was saying I've come to think of the commons not as a faraway objective to be reached, but as a condition for everyday struggle, that to have to build communal relation is a condition to be able to struggle, is a condition for struggle to be sustained, not to die, to have a strong basis. Struggle that are immediately changing the fabric of social life, where people come to each other's house and they eat and they have, so that you overcome the feeling of being alone, of confronting the state alone, of confronting the crisis that we have in everyday life alone, right? And that is part of the struggle. And so the form of organization itself, that organizing must include cooking together, must include singing together, making song, must include a day where we come together not just to protest, but constructively to, I don't know, dance with each other, to get to know about each other's life. That is fundamental. That is what makes the difference between organizing and struggle is something which is transformative. And I hate the word, but I'll use it here, empowering. that much abused word.
I used it before. I used it as well.
Don't worry. Well, to a struggle which is like alienated labor. We're going to a meeting, it's like going to another job. I don't want to go to another, an event and think, oh God, I have to go to this. I have to go to this meeting of my group. Or I have to go, no. And I was saying, no.
That's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable because then if you're tired, you're going to go to a movie. You're not going to go. You have to want to go. And so the question of building relation. And I was saying singing is being a great common building activity. The singing together is like very, very powerful, no? Yes.
That's why I thought, because singing is also art, and that's why with your question I thought it's also linked to this positive notion of sustainable.
That not accidentally, all the powerful movement always had this great song, and this song are moving you, right? I mean, people used to cry to hearing "We Shall Overcome." It meant really something. Yeah. So.
Let's sing more.
Yeah, let's sing more. Maybe we can sing at the end of this meeting. We can all sing.
Do we have I saw you. We start in the middle and move.
Okay. I'm Canadian. I've been in Switzerland for 30 years. I want to respond to essentially support what you've just said. My greatest influence is Indigenous literature, and what never ceases to amaze me is after 500 years of struggle, the point is still for them the love of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something so awesome to me about that when you say the focus is on the struggle, I just say, no, it can't be. It has to be on the beauty of the world. That is the only thing that will continue. I mean, when I see 500 years of unbelievable oppression at every level, and they were still able to walk through that and be able to give their children today hope, that is a proven strategy.
Because they're struggling every day. A struggle, we have a masculine conception of what the struggle is. We have a masculine conception that the struggle immediately evokes images of fists, screaming, protest, and struggle is the everyday, is somebody, who gets together and teaches a child that, 9 years old, you have something to do remember you're part of a community.
Exactly.
Struggle is to teach, you don't throw things on the ground without thinking because somebody else, that's a struggle.
Exactly.
That's a struggle because it's not coming natural to us any longer. It is something that we have to want to do. It's something that we have to activate ourselves to do. And that's in the sense. But it is very true. And I think it's not accident that a lot of the experiences of commoning that I was speaking about are also coming from Latin America, for instance, where there's a strong influence of the history of indigenous communities. And there is a struggle in those communities too, because some of those commons, indigenous commons, are also patriarchal. And women there are also making a struggle to make changes in those commons. But they have a history of commonality with nature and a sense of collective responsibility, of collective decision making that I think has percolated in a lot of social movements. And we can see the difference. In the United States as well. For instance, not long ago, we had the Standing Rock.
Yes.
Yeah, it was one of the most powerful, mobilization of recent year. It was, in the Dakota when a Standing Rock, they were building a pipeline, indigenous land that was going to poison the water. And thousands and thousands of people, and it was so inspirational. The people came from all over. And it was really the women who were able to organize it. Because when you have up to 7,000 people for years in the cold, with the police and the dog and the hydrant and so on, to be able to carry on, it's a tremendous ability. So that experience of reproduction, caring for the children, how to get the food, that experience was fundamental.
Yeah.
And it was the women, actually, that really kept the reproduction going, that allowed for the Standing Rock mobilization to go on for so long.
Yeah. 2 more notes. One is to deal with the limits that we have today. I think we just have to be more humble and realize that we live maybe 60 or 80 years, and that's not a long time in the context. When I think of back to the lesbian feminist struggles of Canada and the women going back to the land in the 80s and how many of those experiments went bad, essentially, we're on a learning curve, and it's a steep one. And I think we just need to be patient there. And my last point is, I love Switzerland, direct democracy. Sorry, people, but you have such a privilege here and such a gift. Please, be careful with it. It is so precious.
Okay. Silvia?
Ja, Fred, du hast gemeint, ich weiß nicht, ist sie nicht zuerst gewesen?
Entschuldigung.
Thank you. I have been studying the idea and history of commons for many years, and I have, with more and less success, tried to organize myself with neighbors and commoning the housework and the childcare. And I have observed something at the intersection of feminism and commons that I would like to hear your opinion. That unfortunately, very often these kind of exercises that we did over time evolved into just a handful of women doing all the work. And it kind of turned out like that every time. Yeah. And so these women were actually then blocked from changing society, sharing their ideas with society, writing, doing art, because they were just doing laundry and cleaning all day. And my question would be, I still believe in the idea very much. And you were talking about reciprocal responsibility before, which I thought was a very interesting start. So what kind of thoughts and advice would you have to go in a better direction, basically?
Yeah, well, one first question is, what is the alternative? Because probably they were cleaning and doing this all day anyway. And maybe doing it together is a little bit better. Right? I tell you that I do a lot of reproductive work, immense amount. And I know that when I have around other women with me, it's another world already if I am alone. So even the fact, because it's not only the work, it's all the little crises or big crises. And so to be able to have other people, to be able to have other women, it's already a big step, a qualitative step. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of work, and I don't know, education work. We have to raise these children in a different way. So there's a new generation. I think that some men, younger men, are, some are more open to understand what is involved. And so we hope, I think that the male world has to wake up to the fact there's all kinds of struggle they have to be part of that I think are still not. For example, right now there's a big struggle in the United States because the right to abortion has been taken away. And why should be women struggling for abortion? After all, women get impregnated because of men, So why? It should be only us wanting to have, not to pay, for sexual relationship with often our lives. So there's a whole world of, so that is an issue. But I think we cannot stop waiting for others to join before we can be moving. And what you describe is already a good step. Not enough. Not enough, but a good step.
I would like to add a thought, but I don't know how big your group is, but it's something that we at Neustart Schweiz also think about. Like that's why we say it needs to be like, let's say 500 people, because we know exactly that there's going to be the one doing things and the one that don't want to do things, and that's fine. But it needs to be a certain size in order for there not to be too much weight on the shoulders of the individuals. That's what we would answer to this. So I don't know how big your group is, but maybe that's a thought.
No, there's all kinds of issues because also in broader, for example, when you have common situation to have men and women. For example, one of the problems in the assemblies has always been that if you have consensual decision making, then most men who could afford to go through the night, talking until consensus is achieved. Whereas the women by 12, a certain point all have to leave because the children have to be put to bed, the food has to be cooked. So, but all of these are issues. So the idea of struggling around commons is not that it is unproblematic, not at all, right? But the idea behind it, of cooperation rather than competition, of sharing the wealth, reciprocity, all these are good principles. They are not easy to implement, particularly in this world. But that's where the work is. And that's, I think, also where the pleasure is. Not just the work, but the pleasure. Because also the tremendous amount of anxiety and fear that we live with. This sense, in the last 15 years, this slogan or sentence has become on everybody's mouth. When you want to say that there is a danger, or you're saying, being thrown under the bus. The notion of being thrown under the bus, which is used to say that you make one small mistake in this society and you got it, and you are under the bus. Right? That everybody feels that their lives are so precarious. Not just the jobs, but the lives are precarious. You lose a job and you are then on the street. You cannot pay the rent and you are on the street. You lose your job, you lose your medical insurance, and then you cannot take, you have not money to buy for a life-saving medicine. So this idea of being thrown under the bus is so much now part. We live with it. Right, and so to have some support, not to feel that aloneness, that it's already really a fundamental step.
I already see the microphone passed to Nitin.
Yeah, hello, thanks. I'm from India, but I live here for 7 years. And I teach a course on agrarian questions at the architecture department. So it's
Can you put it up?
It's mostly for planners and architects to think about agricultural questions, because we've been always thinking about the urban and housing question.
Yeah.
So we've been reading a lot of your work and Maria Mises' work. So I'm really glad to see you in person for the first time ever in my life. It's a fan moment, but
I'm glad. There's so few.
Yeah, but it's been quite a very interesting class, and sorry, so in terms of questions, so I've been sort of doing some work in India and kind of looking at the sort of creative the most recent wave of creative destruction of agriculture, hinterlands, through urbanization regimes, so like urban corridors and sort of massive enclosure of urban commons, but also of agricultural commons and agricultural land through eminent domain and through agribusinesses and all that kind of rationalization processes that have already happened in the West. What's been interesting is to see how kind of people who are mobile, like transhuman pastoralists, for instance, or other ignorant kind of populations, common them in a transient way and reproduce upon them in a transient way, which is sort of kind of moving away from this sort of forever sedentary lens that we've instilled in ourselves around the ideas of urban planning and all of that. And I was looking at the sketch of Hans, perhaps, Stefania, the one that you had in your slides. Is it from Hans? Okay.
Yeah, we don't mention him today.
Right.
We agreed.
So, like, these ideas of degrowth that are there. Degrowth.
Yeah.
To sort of like, perhaps common and to think about the ruins of capitalism and then kind of, find ways of commoning and incorporating them. It's very interesting, and of course Caroline Steele writes about how just for one city like Zurich we'll need like 100 times the size of Zurich just to feed Zurich, right? And we of course don't have that land, like if we project the footprint of urban Switzerland, that is, I'm talking about urban Switzerland just as cities here, we don't have that kind of land in Switzerland. How do you sort of, and I'm sorry that I'm bringing, it's a masculinist move, of course, to bring questions of land again in this very interesting and nice ideas around, like, thinking about practices and everyday life and kind of reproduction. But I'm sorry that I make that move. But how do we sort of think about what kind of practices do commoners need to engage in order to be able to even think about degrowth? Like, like how do we even find a space if we even collectively identify as, people from Zurich? How do we find that space to even reproduce ourselves?
Yeah, well, more than the word degrowth, I mean, I'm not against degrowth, but I like the idea of subsistence-oriented, forms of reproduction, right? So not for accumulation, but for subsistence. And so I've been thinking already that, well, first of all, India, there's a tremendous peasant movement. For the last 2 years, the peasants have been organizing and taking over, and major struggle, very inspiring. Even in New York, we look at it. But, one of the developments that has taken place over the last 20 years in Africa, many parts of the world, has been urban farming, which might be very limited, in Europe, but across the world, the people have been expelled from the countryside, have not gone and necessarily immediately depended on the market, but actually have really taken over, occupied a lot of urban land and turning. This is true in Africa, this is true in many parts of the world, in parts of Asia. So the urban farming has become one of the new novelty. People say that there is a move now worldwide that is breaking down the historical separation between city and country and the historical exploitation of the country from the city. That now agriculture is coming back to be part of urban life. That, I think, is a very powerful example and something to work on. And I think that the land, when you said, sorry about talking about land, no, on the contrary, I think the land is really the basis of everything. And when we mean land, it's not just land. Land means water, land means greens, land means trees, means all kinds of possibilities. Medical, for example, traditionally, if you were in an African village and you had malaria, you wouldn't buy pills, you wouldn't buy chloroquine or other pills, but you went to your garden and many of diseases were dealt with things taken from the garden. You urbanize, you lose not only the land and the means of subsistence, you lose the medical knowledges. You lose a lot of knowledges, right? So recuperating, when you recuperate the land is the foundation. You recuperate also a lot of, traditional. Yeah, we cannot go back to the past, but there's a lot of learning that we can do from the past. So it seems to me that, when we speak of housing, when we speak of the land is the foundation. The land is the foundation. Yeah. And so the struggle for the land is important in New York as it is important in other parts of the world or in Zurich. Yeah.
Again,
and take it out from the market. Yes, take it out from the market.
That could be a title of a song we sing afterwards.
Yeah, a good song. Take it out from the market, yes.
I think the microphone has already passed. Thank you for your question. Nitin, I think the microphone has already passed to...
Me llamo Cecilia. Estoy muy agradecida de estar hoy aquí para escucharte.
Sí,
yellow, up there in yellow. Yes.
Ok. Sí, te veo.
Estoy aquí con compañeras de un grupo de mujeres que incluye a las mujeres migrantes. Se llama FISTE, Feministas Internacionalistas y Solidarias.
Sí.
My name is Cecilia. I'm very happy to be here today to listen. I'm part of a group of women that is called FIST. We are a feminist internationalist solidarity group, which is also forming part of migrant women. My name is Anouk. I'm also part of this group, and I would like to make a little comment about a topic that is meaningful to us, that is translation. We came here because for us, listening to Silvia Federici is very relevant to our practice and our thinking. We came and we noticed there was no translation. We also didn't ask in before or think about it. So we tried to organize translation on the spot. We are used to organize on the spot because we are activists. We are not bothered by this. We find solutions. But unfortunately, it started to be uncomfortable for the people around, although we tried to whisper as little voice as we could. For some people, it was hard around to hear. So I want to thank to the people around for their patience, to put down the anger of being bothered for the matter of our political ideas also, because we want to be inclusive. And I would like to maybe give a little feedback to the organizer that it can be something to think in the future, because also not everyone speaks English, and who speaks English is also a matter of class and race. So it would be amazing to think of traduction.
Sí. Okay.
Silvia.
Sí.
Usted habla de la importancia de las experiencias comunitarias. ¿Qué tiene que decir? Perdón. ¿Qué tienes que decir sobre el exterminio de los negros empobrecidos que viven en las favelas de Brasil, así como de los grupos indígenas y quilombolas? ¿Podemos entender esas masacres estatales como una forma de hacer desaparecer comunidades y fortalecer el individualismo?
Silvia, you're talking about the importance of community experience. What do you have to say about the extermination of the black people that live in the favelas of Brazil? and also of the indigenous people in the Quilombos. Can we understand these massacres from the state as a form to make disappear the communities and make stronger the individualism?
Yeah, obviously, yeah, clear, sure. Bueno, que se puede decir, ¿no? Claro, que son exterminios que destruyen comunidades, ¿no? Que no son seguras de que entiende, ¿no? Porque es claro que toda intervención del Estado, de la policía, de exterminar los que no tienen nada, etcétera, 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 es una forma de genocidio contra los pobres, ¿no? Y lo vivimos no solamente en Sao Paulo, no lo vivimos no solamente en Río de Janeiro, pero lo vivimos también en parte de los Estados Unidos, ¿no? Eso es así, ¿no? Entonces, sí, claro. La respuesta es sí. So I'm saying that yes, of course. Yeah, that this is a form of, genocide of the poor. Yeah, and genocide, attacks and war is a war conducted against those who obviously being dispossessed, being impoverished, are likely to rebel, are likely to revolt. And so it's the state who is destroying its enemies. And we have it in the United States as well, not only in Brazil, maybe in Brazil more, but we also have it in the war against the poor. It's unfortunately very general, and against the immigrants. Look at what is happening now in Europe. Those who are dying in the Mediterranean. Lo que están muriendo hoy, migrantes, ¿no? Del mar Mediterráneo. En Grecia, 500, no sé cuántos, muchísimas mujeres. Yo no creo que se cuentan lo que se ha muerto en Italia, cerca de Lampedusa, ¿no? Cada día, pero son años, no solamente porque hoy hay un gobierno fascista, son muchos, muchos años que eso se pasa, que el Mediterráneo es un cemiterio. The Mediterranean is a cemetery. It's no longer a sea, it's a cemetery. In the Mediterranean, there are now thousands and thousands and thousands of bodies of people from Africa, from the Middle East, youth whose family will never know what happened to them, disappeared. Women, men, etc. It's a scandal. It's a total scandal. Right? And then, these are democratic governments. These are governments who call themselves democratic. What democratic? ¿Qué es democracia? Se llaman democráticos. Además, ¿no? Es que la gente migra por políticas que son adoptadas para los Estados Unidos, para la comunidad europea. People die and migrate, not because they're looking for adventures, but they migrate because of politics that are preventing them from being able to survive in the countries where they live. Clearly, so es esto. And this is what, and then I'm going to say it in Spanish, this is what I was talking before about the struggle to build commons here and community and cooperation, etc., is the struggle to change the logic that is governing our being in the world. Changing the logic that is governing our being in the world. And you cannot struggle for commoning, cooperation, and the end of the exploitation of human beings, in Switzerland or in New York or in Italy, without at the same time engaging in a struggle to stop, the new forms of colonization, the new form of conquest. ¿No? Eso para decir que no se puede pensar de crear comunidades aquí y de implementar una lógica diferente, una lógica que no es fundada sobre la explotación del trabajo humano, sin también al mismo tiempo cambiar, no luchar contra la explotación del África, etcétera, etcétera, de toda la forma de extractivismo, del nuevo colonialismo, la nueva forma de colonialismo, la política de austeridad del Fondo Monetario Internacional, del Banco Mundial, ¿no? Que están recolonizando el mundo. Hay un proceso de recolonización del mundo, que es el proceso, ¿no?, que impulsa la migración. Porque la gente migra no por la aventura, migra por, ¿no?, dar un futuro a sus comunidades. Eso. ¿No?
Thank you
Sí.
for your question and also for your input. There's another question over there. Just before, slowly, we're heading towards the end. We have been focusing more on questions here. Are there other questions after that one on this side? Maybe you want to raise your hand if you have one. Think about it, and I'll head the word over to you in the Silvia, to the right up there.
Hi. My question actually
in the pink.
Okay, good.
My question actually relates to this previous question, and I studied gender studies and political science, and I'm now doing research on like the police and state structures. And my question is basically, I just bought this book. It's called Reimagining the State. I don't know if you know it. I haven't read it yet, but I'm very intrigued. And I think that's basically my question. We were just talking about like state violence. Like, obviously we know that the state reproduces gender, or it can be seen as like a patriarchal institution. It's imperialist, racist, etc. And it's a tool of capitalism, the market. Like, we can't imagine the state without imagining the market. And at the same time, we turn towards the state for like, market regulation and also like redistribution and all these things. So we were talking about, the local level, the small level, and also, however, we keep repeating this phrase, take it off the market, which in our world we're living in now often means putting it back to the state, or like, where does it go? So I think my question is, or I'm really curious to hear your position on like, how do you reimagine the state currently, both currently, practically in relation to the commons, but also in like a utopian world? Like, can we reimagine the state? Is it obsolete? How do you reimagine the state?
I'm really glad you asked this question, because I skipped a few questions and that was actually one of them. So thank you.
It's very important. It's crucial. So I'll try without too long, but I think that the state has clearly a terrain of struggle. But certainly at this stage, we cannot do away with the state, right? Even if ideally many of us would like to do away with the state, the reality is, if today we have a car accident, we go to a hospital, and ideally maybe a state-run hospital, not a private one where we have to ruin us for the rest of our life to pay the bill. So, however, right, so a world that is built around the principle of the commons, to call it this way, is not going to be created, constructed, except through a long process of mobilization and struggle. If you look around, it's obviously not around the corner today. So we are living, hopefully, in a transition period. And in that transition period, we have to understand, it's like the question of reforms. What are the reforms that are actually setting us back? Because they are dividing people. Maybe they are satisfying the needs of a group, but not of everybody. And what are the reforms that are in fact important because they lift the bottom? So it's a very important question, the question you're raising. Because we have to continuously figure out, yes, so we struggle for social services. We struggle for the state. The state, let's call the state capital, because this is one family, state and capital, right? They have the monopoly not only of the force, but the monopoly of the wealth, right? So this is where the wealth, the center of the wealth. So the struggle is obviously to reappropriate spaces, to reappropriate the wealth. You cannot have self-determination, collective self-determination, unless you begin to reappropriate the wealth. But in this period of transition, then what do you do? So we struggle for the social services. But there are many ways of struggling around it. And there are many ways of deciding how do we want the social services. What kind of social services? How organized? So, for example, I've often had problem in the feminist movement where the answer to reproduction, child care, and so on is like state service, state service. Yeah, well, state, yes. State, good. But state in a way that we can control, that we have a voice, we have a decision-making power in the community as to how those services are organized, as to what services we're really asking for, how they are organized. Because, for instance, to give you an example, it's small, but I think is indicative. Yeah, right now in the United States, many black women don't want to go to a state hospital or any hospital to give birth alone. There's a new figure that many are using, the doula. The doula is an advocate. Is a woman who doesn't have any medical knowledge, but comes with you to the hospital when you go to give birth or other things to ensure that you're treated with respect, that you have the care that you need, and the people pay attention to what you say. We have had an example of even people like, famous women, black women, who almost died giving birth because the doctor didn't believe what they were saying or were not paying attention to what they said they needed. So the doula comes, and the doula is the principle of the community. The community comes with you when you're confronting the state. Right? So you go to the state, you go to a state service, but you don't go alone. You go with some form of protection. And this, I think, for me has been a way of thinking of how we relate to the struggle for services. Yes, we don't want to depend on the private world and so on, where you get ruined for life, for the cost of everything. But at the same time, it's not that you allow the state to make all the decisions, because otherwise there will be decisions that will contain a disciplinary element. There will be decisions that will contain an economic principle of giving you as little as possible in the most economic way, in a way that deals with the most obvious problem, but not really satisfying the real need, so that the community has to be involved. And so there are many ways of struggling for state services. That also means, however, that people have to have more time. So we cannot work 50 hours a day, unless, and then be part of a community and deal with education of our children in the school, the people in the hospital, unless the labor movement also becomes involved. And labor movement and struggle has to be in terms of liberating time. Liberating time, and of course not at the cost of starving. But so there has to be, this is where the question of creating common grounds of struggle, of connecting struggle, the struggle for health care, for healthcare services, state provided or daycare, etc. That are also include an element of community control, have to come also made possible by liberation of work time, so that people can be engaged also in the community. Right? So the separation of the community, mostly women, but now of course many women are not even in the community any longer, so will be immigrant women. Right? So the divisions are multiplying. The division and the hierarchy are multiplying. Right? So this question of restructuring, that's where the struggle connect with each other. And that's what has to happen. That has to have to happen. The common ground has to be also the ability to see how our struggle connect. And they cannot be organized in a fragmented way. But that's the question of the state. Then utopian, yes, of course, utopian. Who doesn't want to live in a society where you, together with other people, make the decisions that are important for your life? Who in the world, if asked, would want other people to decide about the decision about their life? Decision they decide about life and death a good life or a bad life. Who wouldn't want to be in charge of the decision they decide, about the fundamentals of our reproduction? So the idea of a power above that decides for us is not, it seems to be a social ideal. Right? I think it's the idea as community that are in fact engage in a process of collective self-determination. And that's my hope.
We slowly need to come to an end.
Yeah, there's another one.
The microphone's already up here. Let's maybe we can do the two questions.
Maybe we can have 2 or 3 and then
Yes. Maybe let's do 2 questions and you answer both of them at the same time. Because I don't want to keep people any longer than they.
They can go.
They can go. I know. All right. Okay. Let's do them together. Okay.
Yeah, picking up on what you said, I'm here. I'm a medical doctor, and we have a 50 hours a week here, so our 100% is 50 hours. So it's quite hard to have the time, and we already so many nurses in Switzerland and doctors, and in addition, the people working in the healthcare system don't even own Swiss passports as a majority, so they kind of decide over the system. So many people are basically don't have the time, and you said that you sit with a lot of anger or rage, and I'm super curious because you were also talking about the interdependence, and for me in my work, because I'm not only a doctor, I also work on a political level on planetary health and how our health depends on the climate crisis and biodiversity. How, for me, sometimes this is a bit binary, that sometimes we strive towards this very connectedness where we're connected with our other humans and ecosystems, but then also we need this big disruption in order to come there, in order to start now, in order to move towards this post-capitalist feminist future that we're talking about. So I'm curious, how do you, for the many, many years that you have been active, how do you find this kind of regenerative practice and being in connection to collectives with other people, but also sitting there with this anger and disruption? Because for me it's binary, but I think it's not a binary thing. So I'm curious to hear.
No, when I say that I'm angry, how can you not be angry? You hear, as I was saying, explaining it this morning I listened to a radical radio that I think is a bit internationally known called Democracy Now! And I listened to Democracy Now! 8 in the morning tonight. By 9 o'clock, I'm like, because the stuff that is happening on a day-to-day basis, and that's where the anger, and you feel and of course, so many things that you cannot. That's where the but you're a doctor, so you must know, for instance, that I don't know in Zurich and in Switzerland, in the United States right now, the biggest crisis is the nurses. Doctors and nurses are leaving, like our doctor, 10 days ago, left the practice, didn't even tell us. Doctors are leaving the practice. Nurses are leaving. There's such a shortage of nurses in New York, in the United States, that hospitals are in crisis. There's been nurses strikes in different places, in New York and in other places, precisely because of what you're describing. And the nursing have come out very powerfully, denouncing, the long hours, the lack of, denouncing that so many people have died of COVID who did not have to die, the lack of investment, the lack of equipment, the lack of, basically so much, engagement by medical authority, the state, and so on, that made it possible for so many people to die alone, attached to a ventilator. And so many nurses, for example, not only to live every day with the fear, with the tiredness, and the fear of taking COVID back to their families, but also with the pain of seeing people die alone in the room, with only them. Yeah. So there's a big, big crisis. I think the COVID has opened a window on so many crises that were there to begin with. It has not created them, but actually has made them visible. You know, women trying to reconcile, you know, working outside the home, working in the home, the children, women having already impossible life. Then comes COVID, and it's madness. Because now they are at home with the Zoom, with the children home from school, etc. All the crisis. The crisis in the hospitals, the constant disinvestment. In New York, in the last 20 years, in New York State, they have closed 41 hospitals. 41 hospitals. 19 just in New York City. 19. Mostly in the poorest neighborhood. So, you know, the story that we used to hear about women giving birth in the taxi because they go to hospital and the hospital's full, right? And why? Because they were not productive enough. Because they could not fill all the bed all the nights. So since they could not fill, they closed them down because they're not actually functioning in an accumulative way. So all of this, I think that this is what we are confronting, right? So that is the rage, but obviously from the rage, then we go and turn it into something that, the rage is a moment, but I think is what, to me, it gives me the energy to move or to try to do something. Yeah.
All right, let's do one last question because I mean we could sit forever, but we're only rented here, so we need to leave.
I see. Okay. Then
they
that's the market.
Let's do that's the market.
Of course, that's
So let's do one
one
last
question and then we go. Absolutely. See.
Yes. We only paid until 15
No,
past.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Okay, I hope it's a good one.
Yeah, it's in the middle there, Lisa.
Thank you, both of you, so much. It's been really interesting. Well, I'm also an architect. I'm teaching a course on architecture and care at the moment. And so I have a question maybe for both of you about the scale of the commons, because I realize that when we talk about commoning, we tend to have this focus on the hyper-local.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you've also written yourself a lot about the dynamics of violence, of globalization.
Mm-hmm.
But nevertheless, I wonder if there is a form of maybe more dispersed commons we can imagine, or a form of commons that kind of transcends the scale of the neighborhood or the city.
I would just say very quick. So there, the scale is from your building to the world, right? From the building to the world.
I'm
You
also
begin. You can.
Thank you for that question because it was also one that was here and I skipped it. So you're a perfect audience, picking up on all the stuff I did not talk about. So.
And you know, I think the idea of common is the question is, with how many people you can make decision about the community. If you have, 100,000 people cannot come together and make decision. So you have to think of a lot of communal, interconnected. You know, the way, for example, the so-called Latin America, Biala, was organized before the European came and conquered. You know, there were many communities, but all connected. They were not isolated from each other. They had a very intense network of relation, commercial and others. But at the same time, were not huge community. They were small enough to be able to actually have the collective decision making, right? If you have the commons you conceive with 1 million people, 1 million people cannot come together and make decision. That actually where everybody has some sort of say as to what is happening. So I think that's the scale. It's something that allows for the process of truly democratic decision making, which now we don't have. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So. So maybe one last word. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you, Silvia, for taking the time and your energy to answering all your questions. We will make the podcast, the audio recording available on our website as soon as we're ready. It will take some time, but will find it on neustartschweiz.ch. tomorrow you're going to go to Glarus, to the Anna Göldi Museum. I would recommend you to go, but I know it's already sold out. So if you have a ticket, lucky you. And one last word, if you want to buy books from Silvia, but also from Neustart Schweiz, we still have the table up at the entrance of the movie theater. Silvia, have a great time here in Europe on your grand tour, and thank you very much.